In this video discussing the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, I'm going to discuss specifically the actions of Task Force Faith as it attempts to break out from the inlet perimeter. And I think I've been doing the past videos day by day. I think this is important to do justice to the story of these soldiers and a few Marines to give them their own kind of episode. So I'm going to start basically Regimental Combat Team 31. We colloquially call it Task Force Faith, but it's never officially designated that. And at 0930 on December 1st, Lieutenant Colonel Faith, who's taken command of this ad hoc Regimental Combat Team after the death of Colonel McLean, decides that Regimental Combat Team 31 needs to break out and move to Hagurubi. He does this without higher orders from the 1st Marine Division or the 7th Infantry Division. He takes his own initiative and basically decides they need to move out. So he has a commander's conference at 1000. It's not his fault, but it's really not organized. He just grabs all available officers. And his verbal orders are for the 1st Battalion of 32nd Infantry, which is his own battalion, to lead the way and clear the road and the high ground. The 2 field artillery batteries are to expend all ammunition on targets along the route and then destroy their cannons, as well as the heavy mortar companies that are with him. The 3rd Battalion of the 32nd Infantry will be combined into one company under Colonel Kitts or Captain Kitts, and they will fight a rear guard action. So he places one of his 40 millimeter anti-air half tracks in the lead, and then there are 2 other 50 caliber quad 50 half tracks interspersed throughout the column, and it's a column of about 30 trucks. They decide to ditch most of the Jeeps and trailers, ditch any supplies or clothing, to burn any vehicles and supplies they're not using. They leave behind 2 of the 50 caliber anti-air half tracks and 1 of the 40 millimeters because they simply don't start when the convoy is about to leave. So as they form up in the inlet perimeter, they're on the low ground. The Chinese see this. They increase their mortar fire, which also includes a strike on a group of officers as they leave Lieutenant Colonel Faith's briefing. So things are not going well from the get-go. Obviously, last video we discussed the attacks on the perimeter and how badly how bad of shape the perimeter was in the first place. So Lieutenant Colonel Faith's intent is to only move or wait until there's air cover to move. So the convoys formed prior around 11 o'clock, but it's not until 1 o'clock that the skies clear enough for aircraft to come on station. General Smith, who is the 1st Marine Division commander, promises and provides Lieutenant Colonel Faith with 20 given aircraft at any given time. So there's carriers offshore, providing basically constant rotation of mostly Corsairs, Marine and Navy F-7 fighters to provide close air support. So the convoy begins around 1 o'clock once air comes on station with Captain Stamford controlling them. And the convoy receives fire within only 20 yards of the southern perimeter. At this point, the Chinese, for the past basically 2 hours, have been seeing the movement on the road. Once they're able to, they see the convoy start and almost immediately stop, they start to close in on the convoy. So Captain Stamford begins calling in airstrikes, including a napalm strike that lands short, which kills about 15 Americans. It causes some panic. Lieutenant Colonel Faith goes up with his pistol and rallies the troops and gets them back into position. But at times, Captain Stamford's calling in aircraft on enemy troops which are within hand grenade range of the American convoy. So refer here. Miller appraised the overall effect on the airstrike as follows, quote, "I was in command of the battalion at this time and feel that Captain Stamford's cool control of our aircraft, in which he directed the dropping of napalm not more than 40 yards to our front, started the Chinese on the run and allowed the 1st Battalion to inflict tremendous casualties on the enemy in our immediate follow-up. The task force breakout apparently received the closest air support in a moving column that was engaged with an enemy in the Korean War. A Marine report later said that Stamford's radio code name was Boyhood 14. A Marine pilot was quoted as saying the Boyhood 14 kept calling for closer and closer air support to less than 50 feet. The pilots could observe people practically clubbing the Reds off the trucks. And then it continues on, talking about the organization of the convoy. The tendency of the men on foot to rush ahead of the trucks was apparent early after the breakout. The officers and non-commissioned officers did not have much success in keeping the infantry on the high ground east of the road where they could protect the truck column. They kept drifting down to the road and to the right of the road where they were more protected. Major Miller noticed that the infantrymen were leaving the trucks behind. By this time, his 2 radio men were missing, and he could not communicate with the forward platoons. He wanted to slow them because they were getting out of control. He sent runners ahead to B and C companies to keep the men on the left of the road. They were unable to accomplish their mission, however, and troops of the 2 companies were becoming intermixed. Miller felt that control was slipping away. He started trotting forward to catch the leading company. Curtis also thought that the troops were getting out of control. He said that after the initial success of the breakout, the troops, quote, flooded down the road like a great mob, and tactical control broke down immediately. So, in reference to that about the Chinese being cut down, there was a lot of panic in the Chinese lines among the napalm, and the fleeing Chinese were cut down. At this point, almost immediately, the road is littered with bodies, both American and Chinese. And there's multiple accounts of bodies having to be moved off the roads so that the trucks could pass. The truck convoy is trying to pick up as many American wounded as possible, but some troops, soldiers are left behind. And this is where the 3rd Battalion of the 32nd Infantry under Company K is tasked with a rearguard action. But as they come under increasing fire, they're tasked with holding the east or left side of the convoy, which is the high ground. But they start withdrawing so that they can basically use the trucks for cover, which not only makes the convoy extremely vulnerable, but all the drivers of the trucks are on the left side. So the drivers of the trucks are taking heavy casualties. The casualties, the wounded themselves in the trucks, many are being wounded again or killed. And Company K, instead of holding those ridges or clearing them as they fight, drift to the right of the convoy so much so that some wind up on the ice of the reservoir, where some even break through the ice and drown. So the convoy moves south. At 3 p.m., it arrives at a blown bridge, the first blown bridge, which is still north of Hill 1221. While under fire, the lead half track has to throw a cable and basically pull every truck through the icy ravine. And again, this is all important because as the trucks slow down and take time to cross this, a lot of the infantry, the small units which have lost tactical control, are just floating south down to Hagaruri in the Marine perimeter. While this is going on and each truck has to get pulled through, the backlog begins at the back end, but also the convoy moves up and then stages about 200 yards up the road. So the convoy is stalled. It's taking immense long-range fire from the rear, from the north, where K Company should have been holding a rear guard, as well as immense fire from Hill 1221, which is to its front and its left. And kind of the sad irony about this is the positions that the Chinese occupy were dug by 1-5 and 2-5, the Marine battalions, and they were even occupied by Lieutenant Colonel Faith's unit before he moved further north to the forward perimeter and relieved 3-5. So these are former U.S. positions. They're dug oriented to the north, which is exactly where Lieutenant Colonel Faith is now trying to move through. So kind of one of those sad and sick ironies that these positions weren't occupied by Army troops, and in turn were used against them. And Hill 1221, Captain Drake said it, and multiple officers interviewed said was the strongest defensive position on the east side of the perimeter, and it simply wasn't occupied. And arguably due to the Army's aggressive nature, they thought they were going to basically continue attacking northward. The night before Lieutenant Colonel Faith is hit, he asked Colonel McLean for permission to keep attacking north, and kind of not realizing the situation they were in. In fairness to them, X-Corps intel at this point really didn't make any big notion about the Chinese in the area, and I guess it's unknown if Lieutenant Colonel Faith really knew what was going on in 8th Army sector just to the west and the troubles they were in. So we go back to Colonel Appleman's book here. During the afternoon, numerous officers and some non-commissioned officers tried valiantly to form parties from the soldiers in the ditch to attack the slope and high ground of Hill 1221, and some succeeded in launching such attacks. One or two groups got to the top of the hill, but then went down the other side of the reservoir and kept on going south until they reached Hagaruri. The earliest of these groups reached the Marine line before it was completely dark. Other groups of different sizes came into the Marine perimeter throughout the night. Most of them were wounded, but the first groups to arrive had fewer wounded. Faith went up and down the road trying to organize groups to climb the hill and knock out enemy positions so that he could organize an attack from the other side or south side of the hill to hit the enemy roadblock and fire block in the saddle from the rear. He had indifferent results, encountering mostly dogged resistance to his exhortations. But those groups that did make the effort killed many Chinese, and the defenses of the hill grew gradually feebler. But the trucks still could not move and kept taking casualties as they sat exposed to enemy fire from the left. So this is in reference to as they pass through that gully and get back on the road, they encounter basically a physical roadblock occupied by a significant enemy force. So Lieutenant Colonel Faith, it's now dark, so they lose most of their air cover. Colonel Faith gathers roughly 300 men and assaults the roadblock from the south. He's wounded in the heart by shrapnel during this, but they are able to clear the roadblock. So they physically move these logs off the road, they clear the enemy off it, and they're able to get the convoy moving again. So the convoy continues south. At this point, they're stopped by a blown bridge. Captain Stamford reconnoiters a small gauge railway trestle that is able to handle vehicle traffic. He finds it passable. He gets vehicles started across it, and as he continues his ground reconnaissance along the road, he's taken a couple Chinese soldiers basically hop out of a defensive position, disarm him, and take him prisoner. His captors a few minutes later are engaged by a few random American soldiers, and Captain Stanford is able to escape, and he makes it to Hagaruri at around 2:15. So the convoy gets back on the road. They move further south, but they start encountering extremely heavy fire at Hill 1239, and this is where the convoy begins to disintegrate through basically just intense enemy fire and just a lack of tactical control. So Lieutenant Campbell was still in the convoy when it reached the end. Perhaps he has the best description of anyone in the final moments. He had left the truck he was riding and was in a gully alongside the road when the enemy fire blast came. He saw the third truck move forward and began pushing a 3/4-ton truck just ahead of it, with no one apparently at the steering wheel. The 3/4-ton truck slowly began veering to the right and then toppled into the gully. Someone yelled and alerted Campbell, who started to scramble forward. The left front wheel passed over his boot, giving him a badly bruised foot and ankle. After it tumbled into the gully, the 3/4-ton truck turned over and landed upside down, the wounded in it screaming in pain. He heard someone inside kicking on the floor, now its roof. Almost immediately, Campbell said, the enemy began closing on the rear of the convoy. He could see hand grenades going off at the end of the line of trucks, which were in a straight section of the road. He estimated the number of vehicles at this time as 15 plus. The Chinese pillaged the convoy, stayed around it most of the night, killing some and taking prisoners of others who could walk. At the end, each man had his own adventure, and some lived to tell. Most of those who were not too badly wounded got out of the trucks during the night if the Chinese did not take them away. Those with severe body wounds or multiple leg wounds froze to death if the final Chinese assault did not kill them. So that's basically a dissolution of Task Force Faith. There's other accounts of soldiers who survived and watched the Chinese go truck to truck, killing wounded that they couldn't take, or just simply letting them freeze to death. So the 1st Motor Transport Battalion of the Marine Corps at Hagaru held the northern perimeter, which faced the reservoir itself. They had a minefield obstacle set up, and they start receiving prisoners just before dark. So Lieutenant Colonel Beale is a battalion commander. He starts assisting these prisoners in, And he also goes and starts basically um, conducting rescue efforts with his Jeep and with personnel. And I'm going to go here. And this is Colonel Beale, quote, "When coming under fire, we would drop to the ice and they would not fire on us. So we did this during the day and got out over 300 wounded men from the convoy. There were many brave men here this day, men shot through the body, helping a buddy, men with hands frozen helping a buddy with a broken leg, men with both legs broken dragging themselves along with hands and elbows. Beale was first accompanied by only 2 men. He obtained a sled and attached it to his Jeep. With it, he could evacuate 12 to 14 men at a time. He had trucks brought to the shore to carry the wounded men as he brought them into an aid station, and he built warming fires on the edge of the reservoir. 2 more Jeeps joined him on the ice for rescue work later that day." And he actually went ashore and walked through some of the vehicles in the convoy as the Chinese troops moved further south to attack Hagaru. They abandoned the convoy, and he says, "I went through the convoy and saw dead in each vehicle, stretchers piled up with men frozen to death trying to pull themselves out from under another stretcher. Yes, I saw this and I shall never forget it." Beale went down the line of trucks from the first to the last, but found no one alive. So Lieutenant Colonel Beale, First Motor Transport Battalion, under communist Chinese fire, go out and rescue as many survivors as they can. He inspects the convoy, sees its carnage, and he's the only American to walk that ground after the incident. So I would like to read Lieutenant Colonel Faith's Medal of Honor citation. So Lieutenant Colonel Faith, commanding 1st Battalion, distinguished himself conspicuously by gallantry and intrepidity in action above and beyond the call of duty in the area of the Chosin Reservoir. When the enemy launched a fanatical attack against his battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Faith unhesitatingly exposed himself to heavy enemy fire as he moved about directing the action. When the enemy penetrated the positions, Lieutenant Colonel Faith personally led counterattacks to restore the position. During an attack by his battalion to effect a junction with another U.S. unit, Lieutenant Colonel Faith reconnoitered the route for and personally directed the first elements of his command across the ice-covered reservoir, and then directed the movement of his vehicles, which were loaded with wounded, until all his command had passed through the enemy fire. Having completed this, he crossed the reservoir himself. Assuming command of the force his unit had joined, he was given the mission of attacking to join friendly elements to the south. Lieutenant Colonel Faith, although physically exhausted in the bitter cold, organized and launched an attack which was soon stopped by enemy fire. He ran forward under enemy small arms and automatic weapons fire, got his men on their feet, and personally led the attack as it blasted its way through the enemy ring. As they came to a hairpin curve, enemy fire from a roadblock again pinned the column down. Lieutenant Colonel Faith organized a group of men and directed their attack on enemy's positions to the right flank. He then placed himself at the head of another group of men, and in the face of direct enemy fire, led an attack on the enemy roadblock, firing his pistol and throwing grenades. When he had reached a position approximately 30 yards from the roadblock, he was mortally wounded, but continued to direct the attack until the roadblock was overrun. Throughout the 5 days of action, Lieutenant Colonel Faith gave no thought to his safety and did not spare himself. His presence each time in the position of gravest danger was an inspiration to his men. Also, the damage he personally inflicted firing from his position at the head of his men was of material assistance on several occasions. Lieutenant Colonel Faith's outstanding gallantry and noble self-sacrifice above and beyond the call of duty reflect the highest honor on him and are keeping with the highest traditions of the U.S. Army. As well, again, I want to give Captain Stanford his recognition. So he was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action against the enemy while serving, as I'm adding, as a forward air controller with 1st Battalion, 32nd Infantry Regiment, 7th Infantry Division, U.S. Army in the Chosin Reservoir area on 27 November 1950 and again on 1 December 1950. On 27 November 1950, Company A was attacked by a numerically superior enemy force which overran the company command post and the 3rd Platoon, killing the company commander, the platoon leader, and seriously wounding the platoon sergeant. Captain Stanford, sensing the immediate danger, voluntarily and without regard for his own personal safety, exposed himself to withering enemy fire in order to rally the platoon and lead a successful counterattack against the enemy. He then ordered the 2nd Platoon to move to a better position so as to bolster the defense of the perimeter. On 30 November 1950, while leading the elements of the regiment, Captain Stanford directed airstrikes against the enemy on the perimeter, When his radio operator was hit and seriously wounded, he placed a radio on his back and continued to direct the air attack while exposed to small arms and automatic weapons fire. Captain Stanford's courageous leadership, tactical ability, and highest devotion and duty reflect great credit upon him and the United States Marine Corps. And he was also awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross as a pilot in World War II, which is interesting. So I hope this was interesting. It shed some light and maybe gave some credit to the men of Task Force Faith who fought very valiantly for their brothers, but ultimately were dissolved in their attempt to break out from their positions. So I'm going to continue on. Tomorrow I'll release a video discussing the breakout of the 5th and 7th Marines from Udamni, the relief of Taktong Pass, and then of course we'll continue as into their entry into Hagaru and the breakout from Hagaru down to Kotori. Hope you're enjoying this series. I welcome any feedback, and thank you for watching.